That Friday evening began like many others, with Rachel shuffling around the kitchen, chatting about a work event she was hosting for her wellness and lifestyle business. She had thrown out enough details about this job over the last year that I almost believed it was just what she claimed it to be, something about bringing fresh talent into her industry. She kept it vague, breezy, wrapped in terms like empowerment and self-expression. I tried to pry more out of her, but she always managed to float away on a cloud of laughter or a well-timed kiss, deflecting questions without ever really answering them. Tonight, though, she seemed especially tense, her hands lingering on the edges of the countertop and her eyes flicking around the room as if expecting something to come crashing through the windows. When I asked if she needed any help preparing for the event, she shot me a quick smile and shook her head. "Oh no, honey," she said a little too lightly. "It's a work thing. I know you'd probably be bored out of your mind with all the industry talk. Why don't you go hang out with Nick? He's been wanting you to stop by, hasn't he?" I didn't respond right away, just observed her, curious about her insistence. Usually, she was the one who complained if I spent too much time with Nick. But tonight, she practically pushed me out the door. I told her I'd think about it, and watched her as she started fiddling with her makeup. She'd done this 100 times before, but something about the scene felt off. It wasn't the party, or even her trying to get me out of the house. It was the flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of nerves beneath her polished calm. After some consideration, I decided I would take her advice to leave the house. I even went so far as to call Nick and let him know I might swing by. But the longer I stood in the driveway, the more I felt the nagging sense that I shouldn't leave. Something inside me refused to let go of the strange vibe I had picked up from Rachel. With a final glance at my car, I turned back toward the house. I spent the next hour inconspicuously observing, watching through the living room window as guests started to arrive, women mostly. Young, some of them barely out of college, if that. They wore glamorous outfits and high heels, looking around my home with a mixture of awe and excitement. Rachel greeted them with a kind of warmth I hadn't seen from her in years, an energy that bordered on affection. Then, about 45 minutes in, a tall man arrived. I didn't recognize him at first. He was lean, confident, moving through the crowd like he owned the place. He approached Rachel without hesitation, greeting her with a casual familiarity that was both unsettling and intriguing. "Vince," Rachel's voice floated out through the open door, low and eager. The name struck a nerve I couldn't quite place, but watching her reach out to touch his arm, I suddenly understood. I stayed out of sight, blending into the shadows by the kitchen as they moved through the crowd together. Rachel began introducing him to some of the younger women, all of whom seemed enchanted by this man's charm. "Vince, this is Chloe," Rachel said, gesturing toward a young woman with dark hair and wide eyes. "She's been looking for the right opportunity, and I thought you'd be able to help her." Vince gave Chloe a smile that was both disarming and predatory. "Of course, happy to help guide a bright new talent," he said smoothly, his voice carrying a confidence that made my skin prickle. His hand brushed against Rachel's back as he turned, lingering there longer than necessary. And Rachel, instead of stepping away, leaned into him with a familiarity that made my stomach drop. My mind raced. Was this the kind of event she was hosting all along? I had always thought her wellness and lifestyle business was a little too elusive, but I'd chalked it up to her creative personality, assuming she was part of some avant-garde scene. But now, seeing her with Vince, watching her light up with a giddiness I hadn't seen from her in years, something became painfully clear. I slipped back into the shadows of the house and out the back door, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She'd put on this whole show, crafted an elaborate charade, and now here I was on the outside looking in, my suspicions confirmed. I needed more than just this one evening's observations, though. If I wanted to get to the bottom of this and truly understand what Rachel was doing behind my back, I'd have to dig deeper. Leaving the house, I walked to my car with a new resolve, a steely determination forming within me. I wasn't going to confront her tonight. No, I'd let her think she'd gotten away with it. But she wouldn't realize until it was far too late. The following Monday, I sat in a dimly lit office, the only light coming from the green-shaded lamp on the desk in front of me. Across the desk sat Sam, a private investigator recommended by a friend who swore by his discretion and skill. Sam was a wiry, focused man with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail in the room the moment he stepped inside. He glanced at the file I'd handed him, tapping a finger thoughtfully on the folder's edge. "So, you suspect she's not only involved with this Vince guy, but working for him too?" Sam's voice was low, deliberate, as though each word was weighed carefully. "I'm certain of it," I replied. "I saw her introducing him to young women, calling him a mentor. It was all too rehearsed." Sam nodded, eyes narrowing. "I've handled cases like this. The signs are there. If she's tied into something deeper with this guy, we'll find it." We spent the next hour discussing the specifics, times, places, behaviors I'd noticed recently. Sam didn't blink as I described Rachel's evasiveness, her recent habit of hiding financial documents, and the uncharacteristically luxurious purchases I'd started to notice. I was relieved to finally share it all with someone who didn't give me that pitying look, the kind you get when people think you're paranoid. Sam simply nodded, jotting down notes, his face a mask of calm professionalism. 3 days later, Sam called me back to his office. I could hear the urgency in his voice, and when I arrived, he wasted no time with small talk. "Blake, we've confirmed it. Rachel isn't just Vince's friend. She's his right-hand woman in recruiting talent for his agency. He runs a high-end adult business, and she's playing a major role in finding women to, well, join his roster," Sam said, sliding a set of photos across the desk toward me. In the photos, Rachel stood beside Vince, watching as he spoke to women with that familiar predatory charm. The images captured her smiling, gesturing, looking every bit the polished, supportive partner. There were more photos of her at various cafes and upscale bars, meeting with young women. Some were laughing, others were tense, but all were paying rapt attention to her. I could almost hear her assuring them that this was an exciting opportunity. "She's hiding income too," Sam continued, pulling out a spreadsheet. "There's a separate account under her name at a different bank. She's been funneling money into it for months, probably her cut from Vince's agency." I clenched my jaw. "She's preparing to make a move," I said flatly, "taking money out of our accounts slowly, piece by piece, and building her little safety net. Probably planning to leave once she's got enough to be comfortable." Sam nodded, watching me closely. "It's not uncommon. People don't usually start new lives empty-handed. She's covering her tracks and setting herself up for a clean break." The thought settled in like a bitter taste at the back of my throat. Rachel had gone far beyond a casual fling. She was methodical, strategic. This wasn't just an affair. It was an elaborate setup to walk away with as much of our life together as she could siphon off. "Then we'll start moving too," I said quietly. "I want to start transferring funds into a private account. I don't want her to see a dime more than I can legally avoid." Sam's mouth lifted slightly, his first hint of a smile. "I've got a few connections in finance. They'll be discreet, and they know how to make it so she won't even notice." "Good," I said. "I want her to think she's still one step ahead." Over the next few days, Sam and I worked together like two chess players planning several moves ahead, anticipating Rachel's every possible countermove. Through Sam's contacts, I shifted most of our liquid assets into secure accounts. I left only enough to keep her from becoming suspicious, watching her continue her subtle withdrawals as though she had all the time in the world. Sam, meanwhile, kept me updated on Rachel's interactions with Vince. As I'd suspected, she wasn't simply Vince's associate. She was essential to his operation. She had been booking hotels under false names, arranging discreet meetings, and taking calculated risks to secure Vince's reputation and expand his client base. Then came the unexpected twist. One evening, Sam brought me a recording, a private conversation between Rachel and Vince. In it, Rachel confessed her fear that I was catching on to their operations. She sounded more paranoid, her usually smooth voice holding an edge of panic. "You need to be careful, Rachel," Vince said, his tone more annoyed than concerned. "You've got a good thing going. Don't let him ruin it." She hesitated, and then I heard her whisper, "Maybe it's time to cut him loose. Just take what I need and make a clean break." I played the recording again, letting each word burn itself into my memory. Rachel had truly considered ending our marriage as nothing more than a strategic exit. She'd been prepared to tear apart our life, abandon everything we'd built together, and disappear with this man and the money she'd stolen from me. You still want to go through with this, Blake? Sam asked, his voice unreadable. I looked at him, feeling the hardening resolve in my chest. No, I don't just want to go through with it. I want her to lose everything. The next phase of the plan required precision. Sam and I met again the following week, this time at a discreet, high-rise office overlooking downtown. It was here that I first introduced him to Janice, a formidable attorney I'd enlisted specifically for her expertise in cases involving infidelity. Janice had a reputation for being ruthless in court, and I knew she'd help me build a rock-solid case that would leave Rachel with nothing more than the clothes on her back. As soon as we sat down, Sam got straight to the point. Blake, we'll need to gather hard evidence. Recordings, receipts, any proof of her activities that the court can't ignore. We'll have to catch her and Vince red-handed, ideally doing something that clearly ties her to his agency. The more incriminating, the better. Janice leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. Blake, if we can show the court she was involved in Vince's agency, especially if she was using your shared home or money to conduct these business activities, she'll have no legal grounds to claim a single dime. But we need to make sure this information is irrefutable. I nodded. Whatever it takes. Sam quickly devised a plan. Through his contacts, he acquired access to a loft that Rachel and Vince had been using as a makeshift office, a place where they could meet new recruits and conduct interviews without drawing too much attention. Sam planned to install discreet recording devices in the loft, cameras hidden in ordinary-looking objects that would capture their interactions from multiple angles. 3 days later, Sam called to let me know everything was set up. I placed cameras in the main sitting area, the hallway, and near the desk where they're usually seated. We'll capture any conversations they have and any personal activities that might happen. He paused, his voice hardening. I'm also capturing the audio from any phone calls they make within range of the mics. The more careless they are, the more we'll have. The trap was in place, and now all that was left was to wait. It didn't take long. The following evening, Sam sent me a clip that stopped me in my tracks. Rachel and Vince were seated in the loft, chatting as if they hadn't a single worry in the world. Rachel was dressed in one of her business casual outfits, slacks and a fitted blouse, but she didn't look like the woman I'd married. She looked calculating, every smile and touch measured as she leaned toward Vince. You need to be careful about the transfers, Vince was saying, tapping the table lightly with a finger. If he notices, everything we've worked for could go up in smoke. Keep those accounts separate. Rachel nodded, her expression cold and unreadable. I know. I've been careful. He's a smart man, but he's distracted. He trusts me. My fingers curled tightly around my phone as I watched her dismiss me like that, as if I were nothing but an inconvenience in her elaborate scheme. But Sam's message wasn't finished. The next clip showed Rachel meeting with 2 young women. They couldn't have been older than 20, fresh-faced and visibly nervous as they fidgeted under her scrutinizing gaze. She smiled at them, exuding a warmth I hadn't seen in years. This opportunity isn't for everyone, she said, her tone light and encouraging. But if you're serious about this, Vince and I can help you make a name for yourself. You'll work under his agency, but I'll be here to guide you every step of the way. The young women exchanged glances, clearly intrigued yet uncertain. Rachel's eyes sparkled with a strange excitement as she reassured them, filling their heads with promises of fame and easy money. I could feel my blood boil, watching her lure them into Vince's business. The next day, I reviewed the recordings with Janice. She was impressed, but far from satisfied. We're building a solid case, she said, but we need something even more damning. If we can show that she's been bringing women to your home for these auditions, or using any of your shared resources, it'll completely dismantle her credibility. Sam nodded in agreement. We can work on getting proof of that. There's chatter in Vince's circles that they occasionally meet with new clients at the house. If Rachel has been bringing them home, it'll be the nail in her coffin. The idea was nauseating, but necessary. That night, I couldn't shake the thought that she'd been using my home, our home, for this dark, twisted business. I needed to know just how deep her deceit went. 2 days later, Sam confirmed it. He'd captured footage of Rachel bringing one of the young women to our house, leading her through the front door with the kind of poise that suggested she had done this before. They met in my home office, where she introduced the girl to Vince over a video call, discussing the potential she had to go far with the right guidance. I watched in stony silence as my home was turned into a staging ground for Vince's operations, with Rachel leading the charge. There would be no coming back from this. Not for her and not for him. Janice arranged a meeting with our financial advisors to move additional funds and secure my assets in such a way that Rachel wouldn't have access to a single dollar she hadn't already taken. We made sure that every shared account was under tight control and that any significant withdrawals would trigger immediate alerts. I watched as they worked quickly, efficiently, every transaction marking another brick in the wall between Rachel and the money she'd grown so comfortable spending. Once we'd tightened every legal and financial loophole, Janice leaned back in her chair, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Blake, when we're through, she'll have no foundation to stand on. The court will see her for what she is, a woman who manipulated her marriage and finances for personal gain." For the first time, I allowed myself a faint smile. We were prepared, armed with everything we needed to ensure Rachel's web of lies would collapse around her, leaving her exposed. The stage was set, and every detail had been crafted with a kind of precision I hadn't exercised in years. The guest list was carefully curated. Friends, Rachel's family members, colleagues from her supposed lifestyle industry, and a few well-connected acquaintances who had ties in high places. The occasion? A casual gathering to celebrate the successful year Rachel had led in her business, an event I presented as my way of honoring her hard work. Of course, the true purpose lay hidden, known only to me, Janice, and Sam. The night of the event, I dressed in a crisp, dark suit and stood by the door, greeting guests as they entered, each one oblivious to the spectacle that was about to unfold. Rachel, looking every bit the part of a devoted wife, floated around the room with a warm smile, basking in the attention and relishing the congratulations. Her parents were there, beaming with pride as they watched their daughter charm the crowd. She had a magnetic quality, no doubt about that, a quality that had once pulled me in too. At around 8, Vince slipped in, cutting a sleek figure in his tailored jacket, and Rachel's eyes lit up the moment she saw him. I watched her closely, noting the subtle shift in her posture, the way her gaze lingered on him a second too long. She quickly excused herself from a group of women she'd been chatting with and made her way to his side. They exchanged a quiet, conspiratorial glance, as though sharing some private victory. I felt the satisfaction build within me. They were walking directly into my plan. With everyone settled and enjoying drinks, I moved to the center of the room and raised my glass. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm so glad to see everyone here to celebrate the accomplishments of someone very special." I began, my voice carrying easily over the murmur of conversation. Rachel's eyes sparkled with pride, assuming this was her moment in the spotlight. I held her gaze for a beat, letting her bask in the anticipation. "Tonight, I wanted to honor Rachel for her hard work and dedication," I continued, "and to also share a little more about the real achievements she's been hiding behind her modesty." A ripple of excitement passed through the crowd, and Rachel's face softened into a warm smile. I turned to Janice, who handed me a small remote connected to a projector screen we'd set up against one wall, currently displaying a slideshow of innocuous photos from our vacations, family gatherings, and other events. I clicked the remote, and the image changed to the first piece of evidence. The image on the screen was unmistakable. Rachel, seated in a dimly lit cafe, hand on Vince's arm, leaning in close as they spoke in hushed tones. An uneasy silence settled over the room. I could feel every eye shift from the screen to Rachel, whose face had paled, her expression frozen in shock. "This," I continued smoothly, "is my lovely wife, Rachel, meeting with Vince, who I believe most of you don't know. Vince owns an adult entertainment agency here in LA, and he and Rachel have been collaborating closely." I let the words hang in the air, the weight of them settling like a stone. A few guests exchanged looks of confusion, and I saw her mother clasp a hand over her mouth, her father's face turning red as he processed what I'd just said. Click! The next image displayed Rachel at our house, escorting a young woman inside, her hand casually resting on the girl's shoulder. The photo, taken from the footage Sam had captured, showed Rachel leading the girl to my office, now unmistakably transformed into a place of business for Vince's recruits. "Now, some of you might recognize this as our home," I said, keeping my tone light. "What you may not realize is that our home has been used as an interview space, a private setting where Rachel and Vince can meet with young women looking for opportunities within his, talent agency." The silence was shattered as people began to murmur. Some guests turned to Rachel, their expressions a mix of shock and disdain, while others stared at the floor, clearly uncomfortable. Rachel's smile had vanished entirely. She stepped forward, eyes wide with fury and panic. "Blake," she hissed under her breath, her voice taut. "What are you doing?" I held up a hand, keeping my expression calm. "Rachel, please let me finish. I'm just sharing the truth about all your hard work." I clicked again, this time bringing up a series of text messages I'd pulled from the recording devices, incriminating conversations between her and Vince about clients, payments, and explicit discussions of their audition process. Vince's smug expression had faded into something darker, and he looked ready to bolt. He glanced at Rachel, his jaw clenched, but I continued before he could make a move. "In case you were wondering," I said, directing my words at Vince, "every piece of this evidence has been authenticated and stored safely. Feel free to leave at any point, Vince, but know that this information will follow you everywhere." I turned back to the guests, letting the enormity of Rachel's actions sink in. "Ladies and gentlemen, my wife has been operating under a false pretense for some time now, using our finances, our home, and our trust to run her business with Vince here. While I wish this were only between the two of us, I felt it necessary to reveal the truth given how many of you have supported Rachel over the years." By now, the room had turned on Rachel. People stared at her, their faces painted with a mixture of disbelief and judgment. Her parents, clearly shaken, retreated to the edge of the crowd, her mother looking horrified, her father staring daggers at Vince. "What the hell is wrong with you, Blake?" Rachel snapped, her voice finally breaking. "This is a private matter." "Oh, is it?" I shot back, my voice firm, because I didn't think it was so private when you paraded strangers through our home or hid money from me. I thought maybe you'd want the people you love to know exactly who they're dealing with." Vince, looking thoroughly rattled, muttered something under his breath and headed toward the door, but not before a few pointed glances caught him. I let him go. The damage to his reputation was already underway, and I had no intention of letting him wriggle out of this without consequence. As he left, Rachel's composure finally shattered. She turned toward her friends, stammering, "This is all blown out of proportion. You don't understand. It's not like that, it's—" One of her friends cut her off, shaking her head in disappointment. "Rachel, I can't believe you lied to us. And after everything, this is what you were hiding." Her family looked at her with visible shame, her father finally turning his back and leading her mother toward the door without another word. The humiliation was complete, and Rachel was left standing alone in the center of the room, the life she'd so carefully constructed crumbling around her. I took a step back, satisfied, as she glanced at me, her eyes filling with hatred. She opened her mouth to speak, but there was nothing left to say. The courtroom buzzed with the quiet hum of anticipation, the kind that only comes when people sense something monumental is about to unfold. I sat beside Janice, whose calm, steely gaze was fixed on the judge's bench. Across the aisle, Rachel looked smaller than I had ever seen her, dressed in muted colors, her hands wringing nervously as she whispered to her lawyer. Her once flawless poise had been replaced with a brittle tension that, for once, didn't seem calculated. As the judge entered, the room fell silent, and proceedings began. Rachel's lawyer rose first, a tall man with an air of practiced confidence. He started with what I expected: character claims, brief mentions of her emotional state, and a story that painted her as the wounded party, struggling to find herself in a marriage that had supposedly stifled her independence. I kept my face expressionless, letting him spin his carefully crafted tale for the court. Then it was Janice's turn. She wasted no time, gliding smoothly to the front of the room with a series of documents and files in hand, each one bearing the weight of truth, cold and irrefutable. She began her opening statement with an even tone, her words sharp enough to pierce the silence. "Your Honor, we have concrete evidence of Rachel's repeated misconduct, evidence that will demonstrate a deliberate betrayal, not only of her marriage, but of basic ethical standards. The plaintiff has hidden financial assets, led an extramarital affair with a business associate, and involved herself in an adult recruitment agency, using her position to exploit individuals under the guise of mentorship. We will demonstrate that her actions were calculated, duplicitous, and wholly incompatible with any claim for a fair settlement." The judge leaned forward slightly, clearly intrigued. I stole a glance at Rachel, whose pale complexion grew paler by the second as Janice spoke. Her lawyer seemed rattled, visibly shifting as Janice continued, her words landing like blows. One by one, Janice presented the evidence we had collected: transfers to hidden accounts, the damning photographs and recordings of Rachel's meetings with young recruits, conversations where she discussed auditioning them with Vince, and where she casually assured them of lucrative opportunities. Each recording only served to peel back more layers, exposing not only the affair, but the entire exploitative scheme she had enabled in her quest for independence. "Your Honor," Janice said, concluding her statement, "this evidence provides a clear view into the plaintiff's deception. My client's assets, contributions, and support have been manipulated, and we request that, given the circumstances, the court grant him full control of all shared property and funds. Further, we contend that Rachel forfeited any right to alimony through her actions." The judge turned his attention to Rachel's lawyer, who attempted to reframe the narrative, scrambling to portray Rachel as merely misguided, but ultimately a woman trying to find happiness. He spoke of her complicated journey, of how she had been misled by Vince, arguing that she'd been used by him and was somehow a victim in this sordid affair. I listened with barely concealed disbelief as he painted her as vulnerable, downplaying her involvement in Vince's agency, and insisting she had been swept up in something beyond her control. Janice, however, was prepared. She had the receipts, literal and figurative, and each time he tried to paint Rachel as the victim, Janice countered with precise, damning evidence. "We have bank statements proving that Rachel moved funds into secret accounts before even meeting Vince," Janice said firmly. "There was no manipulation here, Your Honor. There was only calculated deceit." As she spoke, Janice displayed records showing Rachel's monthly transfers, sly and systematic, accumulating thousands in personal accounts. The impact of each piece of evidence was impossible to ignore. I saw the judge's face tighten, his gaze hardening as he reviewed the documents, listening intently as Janice laid it all out in painstaking detail. He glanced at Rachel, an unmistakable look of disapproval evident on his face. Rachel's lawyer looked desperate, and with no better option, he made one last attempt to salvage what little dignity he could. He brought up a claim for alimony, arguing that Rachel had sacrificed her career to support my own and was therefore entitled to compensation. But Janice was ready for that too. She returned to the recordings, specifically the ones where Rachel bragged to Vince about her independent income and her future plans. We played one such recording for the court, and Rachel's voice echoed through the silent room, cold and self-assured. "I don't need Blake's money. I have my own. Vince, I've been setting this up for months. Once everything's in place, I'll be able to walk away from him and still have enough to be comfortable." The courtroom was deathly silent as her words rang out. The judge's expression shifted to one of barely contained disdain, and I knew the moment her alimony claim shattered in front of everyone. As the recording ended, Janice gave a small, professional nod, turning back to the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff clearly had no intention of supporting this marriage, nor does she need alimony. Her financial preparations were not made out of need, but out of a desire to sever ties while keeping her resources intact. There is no valid claim for support here." The judge finally leaned forward, resting his chin on his hands as he regarded Rachel, his voice stern. "Mrs. Mitchell, you've engaged in behavior that, by all accounts, reflects poorly on your character and has defrauded your spouse. Under these circumstances, I see no grounds to award you any form of spousal support." Rachel's face twisted, her polished veneer cracking as the reality of her situation sank in. Desperation replaced her defiance, and she turned to her lawyer, whispering urgently, though he merely shook his head, clearly unable to combat the mountain of evidence Janice had laid out. The judge's next words solidified everything. "I'm granting full control of all marital assets to Mr. Mitchell, along with sole possession of the property. Mrs. Mitchell, you will retain only what you brought into the marriage, as you have failed to demonstrate any grounds for a claim on Mr. Mitchell's estate. This ruling is final." Rachel's gasp cut through the silence. Her lawyer scrambled to gather their papers, his confidence reduced to nothing more than a defeated slump. The court stood adjourned, and the crowd filtered out slowly, murmuring in shock and barely concealed judgment. I watched as Rachel stood there, shell-shocked, her former support network evaporating as she realized that she was utterly alone. Janice turned to me, a satisfied gleam in her eyes. "That went exactly as planned," she murmured. "You're free of her, Blake. Every piece of it." As we walked out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of relief and clarity, knowing that I'd taken back control of my life. The outcome had been decisive, and now, Rachel's carefully curated world had come crashing down. She could no longer rely on my support, no longer hide behind her lies. The victory in court left a sense of finality, a sharp, clean cut that separated my life from Rachel's betrayal. But one more piece remained to finish the puzzle. Sam and I had talked about it, laying out the plan with precision and timing, and now, with the divorce behind me, it was time to turn my attention to Vince. The night after the final hearing, I met with Sam at a quiet bar downtown. He leaned back, a faint grin on his face, as he passed me a thick envelope filled with documents and, most importantly, his contacts, journalists, city officials, and a few old connections from his days in law enforcement who were more than willing to review information under the right circumstances. "Blake," he said with a quiet satisfaction, "I've pulled together everything on Vince. His agency has been operating just under the radar, but enough red flags have come up in recent months to justify a closer look." He tapped the table, adding, "One call to the right people will open the door to a formal investigation." I nodded, taking in each detail. "In his business, there's enough here to bring it down?" "More than enough," Sam assured me. "Under-the-table transactions, questionable recruitment practices, false documents. Even a few ex-associates who'd be more than happy to cooperate if the pressure's on them." The following morning, I made the call. Within hours, whispers circulated in Vince's circles, rumors of his agency being under scrutiny by the authorities. Over the next several days, I watched as everything unraveled exactly as Sam had anticipated. The city's most respected news outlets picked up the story, plastering headlines about Vince's exploitative practices and allegations of misconduct across their websites and social media. His carefully curated image as a respectable talent agent was shredded, replaced by public condemnation. Within the week, Vince's agency was a hot topic of scandal. His once-coveted reputation shattered as former associates began coming forward, detailing questionable methods he used to lure young women into contracts. Every name involved with him scrambled to distance themselves, deleting any traces of past connections with him, and major clients severed ties overnight. As for Rachel, I knew it wouldn't take long before the blowback found her too. It didn't help her that she had been the key link between Vince and many of the agency's recruits. Her name appeared in the stories, labeled as his primary recruiter, her involvement unmistakable and damning. Then, late one evening, just as I thought it had all settled, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, knowing who it would be before I even read the words. "Blake, please. I need to talk to you. Just once. Please, I don't know who else to turn to." I took a long look at the screen, feeling no more than a cold detachment. Rachel, stripped of her support, her resources, her comfort, now wanted to reach out. She'd been counting on Vince to provide the life she thought she was leaving me for. And with that gone, she must have realized the depth of the mess she'd made. I didn't respond. The messages continued over the next few days, each one a little more desperate than the last. She tried a range of tones, Apologies, excuses, claims of innocence. She even tried appealing to memories of the good times, the moments she must have thought would sway me back. But there was no place left for any of that in my life, and after a few days, the messages stopped entirely. A month later, I met up with a few close friends who'd supported me throughout everything. We were at a beachside restaurant, the Pacific shimmering under the late afternoon sun. They listened as I shared the final pieces of how it all played out. Rachel's last-ditch efforts, Vince's agency collapsing, the details that had come to light after the investigations. One of my friends, Dan, raised his glass, shaking his head in disbelief. "Blake, I don't know if I'd have had it in me to handle it like that," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "But seeing you now, man, it's like you're a new person. I'm proud of you." I nodded, lifting my own glass. "It's strange, really. Looking back, it feels like I was trapped in someone else's life. Rachel played her game, Vince played his, and for a while, I let myself be the guy they played. But now I'm done with all that. I'm taking back what's mine." We toasted, the warmth of camaraderie settling over me, steady and unwavering. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had control again over my choices, my future, and the kind of life I wanted to build. There would be no more lies, no more manipulation, just a clean slate. As I drove home that evening, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet, resolute strength that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The road stretched before me, open and clear. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly where I was headed, leaving the wreckage of Rachel and Vince far behind me. Nothing more than a closed chapter in a life that was finally, fully my own. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.